We will now go to Jakarta, Indonesia, and hear from the Secretary General of the ASEAN Inter-Parliamentary Assembly, which is basically the lawmaker body network for Southeast Asia. And she will tell us what she and other law and policy makers in that region in Asia are doing about COVID-19 and the wildlife trade. Madam Secretary General, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Steve, for very kind introductions. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. My name is Nguyen Tuong, Secretary General of the ASEAN Inter-Parliamentary Assembly. It's very nice to meet all of you, and I am very happy to see some very familiar faces. First of all, please allow me to express my thanks to the EndPandemic campaign and Freeland for inviting me to join this webinars and giving me the opportunities to speak. I'm going to speak about the role and engagement of the ASEAN parliamentarians in combating the wildlife trade and the COVID-19 pandemic. Distinguished participants, Southeast Asia is a global hotspot, as you know, that for the wildlife crime and a regional transportation hub for protected wildlife and wildlife products destined for consumer market. The borders throughout ASEAN suffer from uneven enforcement, loopholes, and weak penalty for violators of wildlife trafficking. Over the past 2 decades, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, we call ASEAN, has facilitated the strategic responses to an emerging non-traditional security issues in the region, including wildlife trafficking. In 2005, with the creation of the ASEAN Wildlife Enforcement Network, the fight against biodiversity exploitation and trafficking of endangered wildlife species within and throughout our regions has brought to a higher level. The ASEAN Inter-Parliamentary Assembly, IPA, consisting of member parliaments from 10 countries in Southeast Asia, has played an instrumental role in familiarizing the people of Southeast Asia with goals and priorities of the ASEAN Community Vision 2025. IPA has reinforced the region's commitment to combat cross-border crime and significantly has included wildlife trafficking, putting them on par with other major transnational crimes such as drug trafficking, human trafficking, terrorism, and arms smuggling. Together with governmental efforts supporting the harmonizations of environmental law to combat transnational crime and wildlife crime, IPA General Assemblies approved resolutions to strengthen law enforcement and regional cooperation in order to combat wildlife crime. Member parliaments have emphasized the importance of reform of their regulation in order to stop wildlife trafficking and protect biodiversity in the region from extinction, as well as discuss on national initiative and possible common legislations. Distinguished parliamentarians, IPA also in coordination with its external stakeholders, including ASEAN's Freeland, USAID, ICCF, UNODC, and other relevant agencies, conducted discussion and a dialogue on efforts to end the pandemic through legislative initiative in order to create a regional legislative framework to combat with wildlife trafficking as the origin of the COVID-19. I also happy to share with you that just recently in the first week of July, IPA co-organized with Freelance the webinar on One Health approach, focusing on long-term solutions that combine human health, animal health, and ecosystem health. We continue to recognize a very important role of the above-mentioned agency by providing technical assistance to the member parliament of IPA in their effort to protect biodiversity and eradicate wildlife trade. On this occasion, I also want to share with you very briefly some information about the wildlife trafficking situations in Vietnam and how the government of Vietnam deal with these matters. You may also know that Vietnam is known as one of the countries having a high demand of biological resource use in Asia. The illegal trade and consumption of wildlife products have become a major threat to the biodiversity. Vietnam is also an important hub and hotspot in Southeast Asia for consumption of plant and wildlife products and a transit point for the illegal wildlife trade in Asia. Thousands of wildlife animals have been exploited and consumed for traditional medicine and trade purposes in Vietnam. Recognizing the importance of biodiversity conservation and also the potential risks caused by the illegal trade and consumption of wildlife, Vietnam has issued a number of policy and regulations to manage and protect rare species. In 1994, Vietnam joined CITES and a number of other international treaties on protection of nature and biodiversity. These laws, policy, and regulations comprise Vietnam's legal framework for the management and protections of wildlife species in a sustainable way. Along with laws, regulations, and international agreement to protect the wildlife species, Vietnam has established and developed more than 160 areas to protect its biodiversity and endangered species. In recent years, Vietnam has implemented many programs in order to combat against wildlife crimes. The criminal code was revised in 2015 with higher punishment for wildlife crimes, and 2 governmental decrees were also updated, with many more species enlisted in the list of protected species in Vietnam. As a result of management effort of the central government and also the provincial authority, the illegal wildlife hunting, transport, and trade have been controlled. And in February 2020, 14 non-governmental organizations in Vietnam and EndPandemics.Earth Alliance signed a letter to the Vietnamese government requesting actions on illegal wildlife trade to protect the country from the future pandemics. And in response to the call for stricter management on wildlife trade from Nature's Conservation Organization to prevent the future pandemic, on 23rd July 2020, the Prime Minister of Vietnam issued the directive on urgent measures to tighten management of wildlife, including suspending wildlife import, strengthening the enforcement of laws, and the strict monitoring of wildlife farming activities at a local level. This directive also called for a broad ministerial cooperation to strengthen enforcement and communication efforts to support the legislation. Through most of the COVID-19 pandemic, the world and also the Asia has been focused on repairing damage already done through the vaccine rollout and economic recovery package. But instead of reactive, the COVID-19 pandemic as a wake-up call, and we know that we need to be more proactive by focusing on promoting and scaling up pandemic prevention solutions. These long-term solutions are always cheaper, as some of our speakers already mentioned, to invest in preventing future pandemics, and the predictable damage than to pay for the post-damage response and recovery. You also may know that ASEAN Community Vision 2025 is coming to effect in just a few years. The need for improving national laws and creating a proper regional legislative framework to combat wildlife crime is becoming increasingly very urgent. And there is still much work to be done to strengthen the legislations in wildlife conservation and management, and in combating wildlife trafficking around the world in Asia and including in Vietnam as well. So this is my interventions at this roundtable, and I'm happy to share with you any more information that you want to learn about the role of the IPA member parliament, as well as this situation in Vietnam, how the government deal with this. Thank you very much. Back to you, Steve.